In this lecture, I'm going to show you how you can change the colors of your character and add color to them. So, for example, let's say that we wanted to change the color of our thigh piece to more of a red color, a color that matches our red wires. Well, what we can do is we can find that layer. So I have that layer right here in my layers panel, and what I want to do is add a clipping layer mask above that. So I'll add a new layer, hold down Alt or Option, click between those two. So now I have a clipping layer mask for my thigh shape. And then what I want to do is I'm going to use the same color that I have here for my wire. So I just went ahead and used my eyedropper to select that color. And then using my fill tool, I can go ahead and fill that shape in. Next, I want to go ahead and change the blend mode on my layer. So if I come over here into my layers panel, where it says normal, I want to go ahead and hit that drop down arrow. And I want to come all the way down to where it says color. So the second from the bottom. Once I select that, you'll see that it applies that color to my layer, but the values still come through. So we still see these dark lines, we still see our original highlights, but it has a layer of color on top of that. Now we can go ahead and use our opacity to change how much of that color we see, but I think I'll bring that to about 75%. So once we have that all set up, I'm going to go ahead and merge these two layers together. So now that's all one layer. I want to do the same thing for my upper arm, so I'm going to go ahead and come up to that layer. So it's this one right here. I'll add a new layer above it, turn it into a clipping layer mask, and then this time, rather than using this red, I'm going to go ahead and select this blue up here that we had for our wire, and I'm going to make this part blue. Then I'll go ahead and change my blend mode from normal to overlay, and now the top part of my arm is blue. I'm going to bring down the opacity just a tiny bit on that layer, like so. Then I can go ahead and merge these two layers together. Now we can also use this to add a little bit more detail in there. So if I go ahead and zoom in onto my body, I'm going to come down to my body layer. So there's that layer right there. I'll add a new layer above it. Then using my lasso tool, I'm going to go ahead and trace out a shape that's kind of a down arrow, but we want it to be following the form of our chest piece, like so. Then we can go ahead and fill that in with our blue, and then we can go ahead, unselect out of that, and change the blend mode to color. And now you'll see that'll apply that to our chest piece. Now we forgot to turn this into a clipping layer mask, so let's go ahead and create a clipping layer mask out of it, like so. Then we can also bring down the opacity so it's not so bright. Then we can go ahead and merge these two layers together. Now let's say you wanted to color a part of the body, but you weren't sure what color you wanted it necessarily. Well, what you can do for this is you can actually use something called the hue and saturation panel that will allow you to affect the colors and the saturation and the lightness and darkness until you get it looking the way you want. So for this, let's go ahead and use the foot as an example. So I'm going to come down to my foot layer, which is this one right here. I'll add a new layer above it, create a clipping layer mask out of that. Then I'm going to go ahead and select my red color again. Then using my brush tool, I just want to go ahead and brush a line like so along the back half of my foot, and maybe one coming across like this, just to add a little bit more detail in there. And then I'm going to go ahead and change that to a color layer. And then I'll bring my opacity down so it kind of matches the red above it on the thigh. So maybe to right about there. But now, like I said, maybe you don't want this to be red. Maybe you see it and you think that you want a different color, like let's say green, for example. Well, what you can do is you can hit Control U on your keyboard, or Command U if you're on a Mac. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control U, and that brings up your hue and saturation panel. From here, you can affect the hue of your layer, meaning that you can change the color. So if I drag this across to my bar, you'll see how it changes color. So I can bring that to more of a blue, green. I can bring that more to a purple. I can bring that more to a purplish pink. I can bring that all the way over to a green. I can bring that all the way more over into my blues also. So whatever color you want, I'm going to leave it at the color I had it originally at 0. And then I'm also going to change the saturation. So you can see you can make it more saturated or less desaturated. And all saturation is it's just how much color or how much gray is in the color. Now, since you're using a color layer, it's only picking up color. So the more saturated it is, the more color it's going to show up. If you bring it more down towards the completely desaturated side, it's going to completely disappear because the color layer only picks up saturation. So if we bring that up a little bit more, you'll see it starts to reappear. You can also play with the lightness and darkness, so I can make it much lighter, which then it also disappears because it doesn't pick up any value. It only picks up mid-tone values, and it only picks up those colors. Alright, great. Now we can go ahead and hit OK. So now that you understand how to change the colors of your characters, you should be able to make a couple variations of your characters if you need to. This is really useful because in Sprite you can actually interchange body parts so that your character can change costumes, they can change hands. So let's say that you had a hand that's holding a gun and a hand that's not holding a gun. Well, those can be interchanged in Spine. Alright, that brings us to the end of this lecture. I really hope you enjoyed this lecture and you learned something from it. Thanks for watching, and I really look forward to seeing you in the next one.